And we have some very special guests to bring out now to take part in what I'm sure will be a very illuminating and enlightening conversation. It's a pleasure to introduce the executive producer, Aaliyah Williams. The co-writer, Linda Yvette Chavez. And we have with us the writer of the Sundance hit Real Women Have Curves, Josefina Lopez. And we have with us a very special guest, the organizer of Defend Boyle Heights, Nancy Meza. Executive producer, America Ferreira. And welcoming back to the stage, the director, creator, co-writer, Marvin Lemus. And our moderator for the afternoon is another favorite of mine from Sundance, the director of the film Dear White People and creator of the series on Netflix, Justin Simien. Justin, I will let you take it away.
Wow. First of all, let's talk about these shoes, Marvin. Jesus. Come through.
They're huaraches.
He just discovered them.
They're cherry red.
Guys, you just discovered a new cinematic voice. How was that? All right, so we don't have a lot of time, and we have a lot of brilliant people before me, so I'm just going to get right to it. So, you know, Marvin, obviously, you know, making an ambitious, multi-protagonist, funny but poignant web series on a budget is super easy.
Easiest, yeah. It's cakewalk.
But even, you know, with it being super easy, I mean, it really takes an important story to get up in the morning and do something this ambitious, and I just want to know, like, how did this start for you? Like, how was this a story that you wanted to tell, and why?
Yeah, so a few years ago, I just moved into my first studio apartment. I was living by myself. I was in a neighborhood that was very predominantly working class Latinos. I don't ever know what to call that neighborhood. It was like Hollywood, where it meets Koreatown, and it was amazing. I felt like I was just like, oh my God, this is how I grew up, and I felt so comfortable in a way. Like, you know, I was living in Culver City for years, like, because I was in school on that side of town, and I loved it. And then I quickly started to notice, like, you know, that there was all these new, like, Thai spot, there's a new sliders place, there's all these bars that I'm like, my neighbors can't afford this. And I realized I'm like, oh, that's for me, and I can afford that, and I'm here and I'm a part of the change. And that really hit me because it was another time in my life that I felt like I was like, oh, I'm at home. I finally found a place where I feel home, like at home, and then kind of that just went away very quickly once I started to really notice that. And I didn't really, I wasn't doing all the research at that point about gentrification or gentrification, but so that is what led me to kind of start to look into it and start to really read up on it. Of course, that led to plenty of articles about Boyle Heights and seeing what was going on there. And you know, the first time I visited, I fell in love with the place because it was the first time that I'd ever been somewhere that, like, a physical location that encompassed my identity as a Mexican and an American. And I had never really experienced that before. And so I kind of just fell in love and wanted to explore what was happening in this neighborhood and kind of really dig into it. And so that's really kind of where it started. And so I, you know, had this idea for this web series. I was like, well, you know, it'll be through, it's like, I want it to be a neighborhood. I want it to feel like a community of characters to understand what, to me, looked like such a complicated gray area where everybody's right in a way. And I wanted to just dig into that to understand it. And then, you know, brought on Linda Yvette Chavez to help me write it because she's just like this incredible voice. The only other like Latina, Mexican American from the LA area that I was just like, oh, like, the first time I read her stuff, I fell in love with it, and I just needed to write with her, and we came up with this.
That's great. That's actually a very natural segue. Thank you, Marvin.
You're welcome.
Because I'd love to talk to you, Linda, about your involvement with the project. I mean, one of the things that to me is so successful about this is, you know, not only how you guys weave these very intricate points of views that don't always agree with each other, but the use of language is so interesting and astounding, and something that I think modern audiences aren't always used to with these stories. So I would just love to know a little bit about your background and where that brilliance came from and how you got involved.
Yeah, I'm nervous. There's so many people. So happy though. Yeah, I mean, my background, I got a degree in screenwriting from SC and my MFA there. SC, fight on. I don't know, I don't do that, but fight on. And you know, I spent many years doing a lot of different things. I did producing. I did all kinds of stuff. I ended up having a company with a few friends where I did digital comedy and where I got my digital chops in writing sketches and web series called Comediva. But since the very beginning, since I was young, college, I was always telling Latino stories, and stories that were fueled by activism were always very important to me. I studied with Shuri Moraga, who is a playwright at Stanford, who just, yay! Latinos in here who know her. And she ignited everything for me. When I first read one of her plays, was the first time I was like, oh, I could tell stories about me and my community, like that's a real thing. And from that point on, it was just like, I just wanted to tell these stories. And the language, I mean, many years of practice, and I think poetry, for me, language is poetry. So writing like something in the script, you're putting together a poem of it's art. It's people talking to each other. It's the way, and I love it. And what I love about the series is being able to show the generational differences in language, which was like so well supported by our actors who were incredible and who came in there and brought a layer of authenticity that was just incredible. Which is always, I think, the big challenge in a lot of things that you're trying to like capture. Because even I think as Latinos, you know, we try not to fall into stereotypes, so it happens still sometimes. And he and I spent so many days writing and being like, wait, is this ignorant? Like, you know, like moments where like, oh, are we doing what we're not supposed to be doing? Like we were always like checking each other and like working through that together, which was so beautiful because this was the first thing he and I worked on together. And I had never worked with a partner before, so writing with him, you know, I went into it nervous. He wasn't. He was like, what? It's no big deal. I was like, oh, I don't know how it's going to be. But like, just basically like fell in love in terms of writing, and we're able to capture that together.
That's awesome.
I'd love to tack onto that, because also, I mean, you're talking about languages, and it was like the most important thing to us to be able to write in the two languages. To write in, like, you know, in Spanish and in English, because we're writers that speak two fucking languages, and we want to write in that. Like, I want to use both of them, you know, like, or why not?
Yeah, so. That's totally right.
If I could speak two languages, I'd do the same. So kudos. You know, shout out to the EPs. You guys, you know, you're part of the reason why. Part of the reason why this thing, you know, gets amplified. You know, America, I know that you obviously have been a storyteller and an activist, you know, for a very long time, and you know, you've made your career on that. And I'm just curious, like, why this project? Why was it something that drew you to it?
Well, so many things, and I want to get to them all, but this is all very, very, very full circle for me. My first time in Boyle Heights was when I was 17 years old and got my first real acting job in Real Women Have Curves, which Josefina Lopez wrote as a play and then as a film. I grew up in the San Fernando Valley, so most of LA was unknown to me, and Boyle Heights was very unknown to me. And Marvin and I really bonded early on over that feeling of never really feeling at home anywhere. Growing up, you know, too Latina for the white people and too white for the Latino people. And I remember going to Boyle Heights and for the first time when I was 17 and thinking I didn't even know, even though I lived 30 miles away, that there was still space for our culture and our language and our art to thrive. And I remember shooting in Mariachi Plaza, and Boyle Heights looked very different in 2001 than it does now. But falling in love with Boyle Heights and thinking and seeing for the first time an actual physical space that was carved out for our culture, for those of us who were Latino American, where Cesar Chavez, started planning his work, and Dolores Huerta, and so Boyle Heights has a very special place in my heart, even though I'm not from there. It's one of the first places where I really saw myself reflected back at me. Why this project? It starts with Marvin and Linda. I mean, like Marvin said before, I think that there is this fallacy that, there aren't more Latino projects because we can't play in the big leagues, and I think that that's just bullshit. And when I read Marvin and Linda's scripts, I was laughing out loud in public and crying at the same time and thinking, what is this? Like, what is this feeling that I'm laughing, I'm crying, and it's seeing yourself for the first time reflected back at you from pages. That is an all too rare feeling for some of us, to get to see ourselves reflected back at us. And it was the humor and the making fun of ourselves, but also understanding that there's pain in all of that, that we are raised, to embrace our American roots, and it's our own parents who are telling us, or for me, don't speak Spanish, learn English so you succeed and you do well, and it's all from places of love. But Marvin and I really bonded over our process kind of later in our young lives, of wanting to reclaim that for ourselves, wanting to reclaim what our culture around us told us we weren't allowed to own for ourselves. And I will say, like Marvin, gentrification is something that I think is slightly on people's radar, and was slightly on my radar. The real complexity of the issues and the reality of the issues before this project, and that intrigued me. But the process of making this series has been an immense education, and one that I know we're grateful to have had. So I think it's Marvin and Linda's voices, and I can't thank Aaliyah and Charles King and Macro enough for believing in these voices, for putting money behind these voices, for trusting them. We can't do it without people willing to take a bet on us. I didn't take much of a bet. I showed up, I did a tiny part, I put my name on the project, I gave my notes, and I'm here. But they're the ones who took the bet, the money bet, and we want to thank them. And I also want to thank Sundance and Trevor and everyone here who acknowledges why this is so special and brings us into the mainstream conversation. So thank you.
Amazing. And I just got to say thank you, because, as a quote-unquote outsider to this particular experience, you guys are doing this work to see yourselves, but that allows so many of us to see ourselves from a perspective that we don't always get the chance to. And so I think it's profound what you guys are doing. And, this is also a nice segue. Aaliyah, Macro sort of prides itself on bringing these kind of sort of undertold stories up, to the popular culture. So, talk to me a little bit about why this is an important project for Macro, and what you hope to see it do.
Well, this is why Macro exists, and why this project on a couple of levels. One, we want to tell authentic stories that allow, people to see themselves in a way that they haven't seen themselves before. In some cases, haven't seen themselves at all. But mostly wanting people to see 360-degree representations of the amazing, beautiful, hilarious, fucked up, and lovely people that they grew up with. And on the other hand, as we were contemplating what would premium short form content look like for the multicultural space, I couldn't think of a better person to call when we got started than Marvin. who I knew had been killing it in sketch comedy for a while, but was extending his filmmaking chops. And so, this project is really like the ultimate expression of how we want to support artists. It started with Marvin sending me an article about this term, gentrification. And I was just struck by the specificity of it, but also just the global impact that everyone is experiencing with change and displacement and identity. And we were just thankful to have Linda to become a part of it, and then see this beautiful team flourish. And then when America came in, was it like a week before we were going into production, like 2 weeks before we were going into production, she was just sitting down with us, again, wanting to sit down with amazing artists that have been killing it in the game and see what is a way that we can collaborate to do the passion projects or the things that people have said, that's not commercial, I don't know if we can sell that. In that conversation, America just really understood what we were doing, and it was just a blessing for all of these beautiful artists and people to come together to make this fire.
Well, thank you. Also for keeping me partly employed, but also for bringing this story to the world. Shout out to Charles King and the Macro fam.
They were amazing. Macro was incredible. The whole process of writing with them was so refreshing, because having done this for a while, to have someone not look at something and say well, I don't get that, take it out. Versus, I don't get that, but does it make sense to you? Will it work for your community? Yes, it will. Great, do it.
I learned a lot about Walter Mercado. I had no idea.
I schooled everyone on Walter. So, that's another part of why that was such a blessing, to have people who get it, who aren't trying to control the material just because of their own ignorances and making assumptions. And that was beautiful for us.
That's great. Now, Josefina, you are legendary. Real Women Have Curves is an iconic film. But even, beyond just, you as a storyteller and a filmmaker, you're, very much involved in your community. And, one of the things that I think any storyteller of color always comes up against is, what is our responsibility to the communities that we're telling our stories about? And also, how do we tell our personal truths? And so I would just love your perspective on, literally sitting between both of those worlds as a storyteller and a community activist.
Well, I grew up in Boyle Heights. I got there at 5 years old, so all my life has been in Boyle Heights. And I decided to get an education and to leave the barrio to come back and open a theater, and I got a master's degree at UCLA. And anyway, just to throw in the, and I didn't need the degree, but I wanted to get a degree so that I could come back to the barrio to teach playwriting and screenwriting classes. Some of my students are probably even here. And I wanted to tell our stories, but I didn't want to be the whole representative for the Latino community. I said, no, there's thousands of stories. I cannot tell them all. So I created lots of programs. We created a program called Chicanas, Cholas y Chisme, where we empower Latinas to write, direct, and produce. We do LGBTQ, the Brown and Out Theater Festival. I wanted to, not just because, sometimes when they think of Latino, it's what's so amazing about Latino is that it's a full spectrum. Some of us just got here, some of us have been here before this was the US. So to tell those 1,000 stories, I wanted to educate as many writers. So for me, I've seen the progression, because one of the goals that I set out to do was to change the narrative of Boyle Heights. To make, because people, the only thing that would show up on the news would be the drive-bys. When you grow up in a neighborhood where it's all gang violence, and I was very lucky that I grew up in an intact family, so the idea of joining a gang was never part of my reality. So I don't really write about that. But you grow, in the news, when they talk about drive-bys all the time about Boyle Heights, and that's the only thing they talk about, I set out to say, no. World premieres happen in Boyle Heights. Artists happen in Boyle Heights. I set out to change that narrative, and I feel like I succeeded. But for me as an artist, I'm learning that I succeeded a little too well. Because then people said, oh, what a great neighborhood. And I was like, yeah, it's a great neighborhood, but you don't have to move here. Just come visit, It's cool, right? It's okay, come visit. You won't get shot. You'll have great tacos, but go back to, it's fine. Go home. So part of me, and then I'll tell you a story. I started a little theater in a building. And I remember I learned that I was a Gente-Fier in a very sad, funny way. I wanted to move my theater out because we already got a bigger theater. And the landlord said, oh, no, don't move your little theater. We love it because all the people from the arts district think it's so cool that it's here. So they actually want to move upstairs, and I can charge $1,200 instead of $700. And I was like, and part of me was thinking, and I had wanted to buy that building. My husband talked me out of it, right? Because I knew that as soon as the metro came in, as soon as a metro comes into a poor neighborhood, that's where the gentrification happens, in those stops. So I knew, I said, no, we got to buy this building, because if you don't buy this building, someone who doesn't live in the neighborhood is going to hide, you know, and they did. They did that. They didn't fix up the building. Oh, no, probably my landlord's watching this going, okay. Anyway, so, and I remember thinking, well, you know, I wanted to get another retail space, but he wouldn't give me that space unless I gave up the apartment upstairs that we were using for our dressing room. And I remember thinking, oh my God, this is how gentrification happens. Like, artists set out to create community, to make people see that, you know what? This isn't a ghetto, this is a community. We are under-resourced, but that doesn't mean we're not resilient, that we're not creative. You know, and now, someone who's not from the neighborhood sees an opportunity because they know as soon as the metro comes in, they can, you know, what is it, $800 more, $600 more? And I remember the apartment that I gave up, he started charging a lot more money. And I felt bad because I said, wow, I brought theater to this community because I wanted to make it accessible. I don't want the arts to be elitist. The arts are for everyone. The arts give us our humanity back. The arts reminds us that we're not just living here for a hand-to-mouth existence, that we are something more than just a body. The arts give us our power back. And then it was sad to see that some of the neighbors had to move out. So I remember thinking, okay, we really have to be aware, you know, and so now I have a theater. We educate people. People always say, you know, we're always struggling for money. And people say, oh, why don't you just raise the ticket prices, right? And I say, well, as soon as we do that, we don't make theater accessible to this community. Then people say, well, why don't you just have VIP seats? And I said, I do not want to have a theater where all the white people get to sit in the front and all the Latinos in the back.
Yep, yep.
So for me, you know, and then one of the other things that happened is there was this beautiful building, actually, you included in the mariachi scene, where they're in the restaurant that used to be called Senata de Garibaldi. They had to close down. We took over that space, and I consciously did it because I said, you know, this is such a beautiful building. This was a source of pride for us because they serve French Mexican food. And if this building gets taken over, becomes a brewery or a French bistro that serves like avocado toast, it's going to really be demoralizing to the community. And I told my husband, look, we're in a position where we could take over this restaurant. And we make the prices affordable so everybody in the community can be there. You know, the people that are succeeding in the community are the people that say, you know what, we can be the bridge. We are not saying, oh, white people don't come. We're saying everybody can enjoy this, but we have to not leave anybody out. And I think that's what we want, because, you know, everybody wants progress, but no one wants to be left out. Yeah. So when people say, oh, you know, you guys don't like progress, you know, when I was there and the gangs were there and the city neglected this community, we all wanted these wonderful things, and we all fought for them, right? All these community activists fought to make it into a cool neighborhood that people go, wow, what a great place, there's culture. And now it's being taken away. And then let me just get this, and I'll shut up soon. Is it for me?
Keep going.
What's at stake? No,
keep talking.
Because I can ramble here. But I've been with this for so long, and you know, for me, I wrote a play last year called Hipsteria. So I actually spoke to a historian who specializes in Boyle Heights history. And one of the things that I discovered, you know, why this was so painful to me is that, you know, I came as an immigrant. And when you have to leave your country and you come here, and I was undocumented, so you constantly feel like you don't belong anywhere. When you finally say, this is my home, this is where I belong. And then people say, okay, well, it's not time to go. And for people who are, especially Native American, right, we're like, well, where do we belong, right? We have a right to exist and be here. And so now that we've turned this community into a beautiful community, and that's what I wanted, it's sad to me, and this is what's at stake, okay? Because people say, oh, it's about the buildings. I said, no, it's about the people, and that's what you captured. But what's really important, and I want everybody to get this, is this community was, you know, it was illegal for people of color to live west of the LA River. There were housing covenants that prevented anybody who wasn't white from living west of the LA River. So this community was a really great place because this is where Italian history happened, Jewish history, Mexican American history, Japanese history, Russian history. This is such a rich place. very unique from the rest of the United States because we weren't allowed to live anywhere. As a result of these communities coming together, they were able to elect the first Latino councilman, Mr. Roybal, and he was able to challenge those housing covenants. So there was all these communities of color working together to change the laws, and eventually people started leaving. And so why it's so upsetting is that, you know, we weren't allowed to live anywhere, and now the one place where we're thriving, where we're showing our creativity and our resiliency, we're getting kicked out. And that's not fair, and people are exploiting that. You know, what's so upsetting is when you see apartment buildings that highlight Mariachi Crossing. Who came up with that shit, right? Mariachi Crossing, and so they can exploit the fact that, you know, mariachis are there, but the mariachis are getting kicked out. You know, the artists are going to be kicked out pretty soon. A lot of our actors in our theater are getting kicked out, right? So I go, don't exploit the fact that this culture is this and then destroy it and turn it to unbearable sameness. We don't want it to look like an IKEA catalog. Okay? Culture is about showing your specificity, your passion, and when life starts looking like an IKEA catalog, it sucks. You know, we don't want that in Boyle Heights. We want to celebrate everything that's great.
Come through.
And then one more point, and I'll shut up. Okay.
Take a bow.
My last point.
I feel like she should stand and
is
take a bow.
As a result of all the work that all these artists are doing to speak up, I want to start a museum, the Boyle Heights Museum. You know, because I go, it's such a loss if we lose all this Jewish history, right? All this Japanese history, the internment camps, Mexican-American history, Chicano history. To me, that's really the loss. It's affecting people. But 100 years from now, we're going to go, shit, we could have saved Boyle Heights, the history, and all the beautiful things. And so so we're responsible for that. And that's really my mission now.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I mean, you know, the sort of like parallel in the black community is, you know, people are in love with black culture. Black people.
But not black people.
So, you know, again, thank you so much for bringing that passion through in your work and giving us all a perspective that we don't necessarily stumble into in our everyday lives. Nancy, now you have an interesting sort of story with this team, in that you sort of, you know, obviously like you were a fierce activist, but you've seen both sides of this, and also, you know, this is one of those rare opportunities where a group of artists actually consulted the community about which they want to comment on. So I want to hear a little bit about how, you know, what your conversations with the creative team was like, and just also like what's going on in your hood, and what is the responsibility of storytellers to that.
So yeah, thank you for having me. I was gonna say that Boyle Heights, and not just Boyle Heights, but all hoods are on fire right now, right? Gentrification isn't something that's just happening in Boyle Heights, and one of the things that we've seen, right, is as Boyle Heights, we're pushing unapologetically because we love our community so much, right? So I was gonna say, you know, as Defend Boyle Heights, we are a group of folks who came together who have so much love for our community that we're willing to bend reality to make sure we keep it. Right? When folks are telling us that gentrification is inevitable, it's gonna happen, we're like, fuck that, right? We're gonna try our best to make sure, we're gonna succeed and save our neighborhood. But what's been happening now is that it's affecting other neighborhoods, right? Folks are like, Boyle Heights, you know, it's kind of political, so we don't want to move there. So they're moving into Highland Park, or they're moving to, like, you know, the surrounding areas, right? South LA, Lincoln Heights. So we are right now really working on a citywide thing. So I would say this is something that affects everyone. But for me, you know, definitely being involved in organizing in Boyle Heights is important as an immigrant woman like Josefina. I was fortunate enough to come to the East Side when I was 2 years old. My mom migrated from Mexico. And yeah, the East Side has always felt home. I've never felt like I lacked a sense of home. So for me, when I think of gentrification, yes, it's white supremacy. Yes, it's class warfare, but it's also forced migration. Gentrification is forced migration. It's forced removal of people. And in Boyle Heights, we've seen the forced removal of people that takes on by government agencies, right, with our Japanese community, and we're seeing that now. So for me, in terms of the work that I do, it's really at the intersections of storytelling. I'm part of also this media group. We're called Underportable Productions, and they're in the back. So again, Underportable Productions, shout out. And we're a group of media makers, and that's kind of how we got connected to Marvin and Linda. So we're a group of media makers, and we make funny videos in the hood. So I have this character, and her name is called La Quirky Nancy. And what she does is she discovers things that were already there and puts them on YouTube.
It's hysterical. If you haven't seen it, please.
But this is kind of like when your work, right? But in the past, a lot of folks that are part of Underportables and part of our group, we're basically kind of the media wing and the media arm of movements, right? When you're building a movement, the story you're telling is extremely important. And for me, having come from immigrant rights organizing, where they never get your story right, it was extremely important in terms of, us being coalition members, as Underportables being coalition members of Boyle Heights, being very strategic in how we tell our story, right? So if y'all follow our Facebook, right, our videos, like that, it's like Chisme Central, right? But it's dramatic as fuck, but it's important to be on the right side of the drama, right? But it is around storytelling and kind of having ownership over our own stories. And I think in terms of Boyle Heights and the Boyle Heights story, yeah, community is never consulted. And it was crazy because I met Marvin and Linda. We were at a panel, right? UCLA had a panel. I went to UCLA as well. There's just so many dope folks that go to UCLA, then come back and actually do shit in the hood, which is dope. And so basically, I was telling off my professors at this panel. I was like, because they were basically saying that in order to save gentrification, we need to write a policy memo. We need to do research. And all this organizing thing, y'all just need to go talk to Jose Huizar, and tell your council member your concerns. And I spoke up. I was like, that's bullshit. You're a Chicano Studies department, and you're shitting on organizing. I shared my story, and Marvin and Linda actually came up to me because they recognized my work with Underportables, and I was like, well, I'm part of Defend Boyle Heights as well. And what I really appreciate and want to uplift in terms of Marvin and Linda is really the process that they were open to. Marvin and Linda were the ones that kind of made themselves vulnerable as artists, and that's hard, right, as an artist. We met up, we checked in for coffee, even though coffee right now is like a hot thing in Boyle Heights, right? And I don't want to tell you where, because then everyone's going to go, right? So we met up at the local coffee shop that all the locals know is not a gentrifying shop. And they were very honest, they were just like, we wrote this 2 years ago, it's already been in production and a lot has happened in the neighborhood. How can you help us? How do we not just use this event as an event for entertainment, but really uplift the issue? And they were also just very honest in their process, right? Letting us know that they wish they could have included more things. But basically, Marvin and Linda have created what I feel is a process that anyone else should follow when creating media, especially creating media around Boyle Heights. The community needs to be at the center of it. And Marvin and Linda, even before production happened, they were on the phones calling everyone, which is funny. When they first met me, I was working at East LA Community Corporation as their communications person. Unión de Vecinos was challenging a kind of relocation process that we saw, and I was in the middle, right? I would be at work every day and then have to go home, and my homies be like, "Hey man, what the fuck is your work job doing? What the hell, And it was really an intense process. And for me, I shared with Marvin and Linda, I had to decide, right? So, is my job to defend my organization that I'm working for, or to defend my neighborhood? And I chose to defend my neighborhood.
Yeah, we were on the phone with her, and we're like, man, that Nancy lady, she's super dope. She's so cool. She's so about it. And a year and a half later, we see her at this panel, and we put two and two together. We're like, that's the same Nancy. She's still dope.
Thanks for being dope, Nancy.
So the process, right? And I know in the room right now there are artists currently who are working on another web series around gentrification in Boyle Heights, and y'all are not including community in the process, and you know who you are. So for the folks who are out there, okay, you know who you are. So just know, right? Marvin and Linda have already, Marvin and Linda have already set up a process that it seems kind of functional, right? It works pretty okay, right? So there is a process to follow. So if you say, oh, we checked in with community, no, you didn't.
You can talk to me as well.
Right? So that's all.
Get right. Get right or get shut down.
You will get shut down. You will get shut down.
I don't know.
So here's the thing. So, first of all, this could literally go on for hours.
I know, sorry about that.
I'm obsessed with all of you. It's fine. But the reality is we only have a few minutes. So I want to bring up something, and I want y'all to get into it, okay? Because this is something that black folks we've been dealing with since the Harlem Renaissance, which is the balance between telling our truth of a thing and also feeling responsible to our agendas, our social agendas. And you know the deal. Like whenever you start telling the truth about your thing, because we're so underrepresented, there's always a community or a group of people that feel left out or feel like you didn't hit their story on the head. And so my question, you know, I want to start with Marvin and Linda, but it's really an open panel discussion, is, you know, how do you strike that balance? What I thought was so, for me, brilliant about the series is that it never really comes down either way. Like, so many of the endings are melancholy, you know, like the mariachi episode where, yeah, he takes on the Backstreet Boys song, but is that happy? Is that sad? I'm not sure. And, you know, what I want to hear you talk about is specifically, what is that balance between being a storyteller, period, and feeling a sense of responsibility to, you know, the community in which you happen to be a part of?
Yeah, I've lost a lot of sleep.
Get into it, let's fight, let's do it.
Linda, she knows, I've lost a lot of sleep over that.
We've spent many sleepless nights talking about it.
Because I think when we went into it, it was for me very much an exploration of the issue of the neighborhood, también just like my identity, because for me what like every episode kind of comes down to is this conflict of identity, this thing that I've grown up feeling my entire life. And you know, so when I first started to, you know, read about Boyle Heights, that's what, like the first thing that jumped out at me. I was just like, oh, like there's this physical location that is dealing with that, this feeling that I know like too damn well. And it was an exploration, so I don't know that I didn't go into making it with a responsibility. It wasn't until we started basically production that I realized, and I'm like, oh, this is still, it's like, it's not something in the past, it's like a current thing. It's like, you know, there's real people dealing with this, and that is when it started to get real, like, you know, really becoming acquainted with the community and la gente of just like what's happening out there. And that's what I think when it started to get complicated for me, I was just like, oh, like where does my responsibility lie here? And I think going into the, like, you know, if we get to do this, if we get to continue telling these stories or any other stories, I feel like there's still, I have a renewed sense of like responsibility for it. Like, and I think that comes in with wanting to make sure I'm always building representation, that I'm always checking. Even when we were writing this, we would write characters and we're like, wait, hold up, is this a stereotype? Like, are we writing some, like, are we, like, is the colonization taking over on this character for a second? And like having to check ourselves with that. But I think that it's hard to find that balance. Like, I don't know that I can answer how to balance that. Maybe Linda can tell you, but
yeah, I mean,
I haven't figured it out.
I think, oh, such a big question. I think for me personally, one of the things that this story brought to me was, because I had always done Latino stories, had always been telling these stories, and I feel the point of growth for me was realizing that even though I'm Chicana and I'm very in touch with that, I'm very vocal and I have a lot of activism in my art, that even though I was telling this story, this was still not my community. So I saw it as like, these are Chicanos, this is what my family, like, it's from, they immigrated to East LA and Boyle Heights. Like, I felt like this was mine as well. And it wasn't until we got deeper into it that I realized that community works on different levels. You know, there's the macro and then there's the micro, which is, there's the Chicano community and then there's the Boyle Heights, and then within the Boyle Heights there's the artist community, and then there's the older generation, there's this, like, we just saw so many complexities, and it was so important to me and to Marvin that we, I think part of our process was to make sure that we didn't judge anyone, that everybody has a side to their story of why things are happening the way they are in their community, and that all we can do is come in as an objective observer and not judge it and just tell the story. And I think America mentioned something earlier about seeing herself reflected in it, and it's something that I like to say a lot, which is the reason why you need to hire the people who understand these communities is because we write from a place of love when we know these people. So for us, when we were writing this, we could relate because we are, you know, he's Mexican and Guatemalan, I'm Chicana, we both grew up here, have immigrant parents, we know the experience, and we can write these characters from a place of love. And when you write from a place of love, you're gonna get complex, interesting, multi-layered characters versus from a place of ignorance and fear, which I think a lot of characters that are written about us, that's how they are portrayed because the people who write them don't understand them.
I think the other thing was, we had a lot of conversations early on about not being concerned about each episode tying up nicely with a bow. Like, this isn't Disney. You're talking about a living, breathing community, and there was a lot of concern. Well, we said it was a comedy. I'm like, well, sometimes shit gets real. Yeah. And, you know, it's like, I remember, and Anna's episode was the one that really got us to talk about, okay, how do people choose the different layers of their identity, and how does that play into how we experience things, or our perspectives of different folks with what we're doing, with how she's trying to, you know, navigate her situation with the owner of the liquor store, but she's also standing up for her sexuality and all of that good stuff. So, you know, I hate the word intersectionality, but I do love that Marvin and Linda dove into all of those layers of what builds up an identity of a person and what builds up the identity of a community, and that's what you got. I just want to speak to what Nancy said about working with the community, and she mentioned vulnerability. I think, like, as artists, I think a lot of artists will talk about, like, well, I'm just here to tell a story. I can't, like, answer to everyone. And sometimes they throw out the baby with the bathwater, and they act like they don't have any responsibility. And I don't believe that. I believe that as storytellers, we've been born into this world to tell stories for our communities. Like, that's what we're here to do. And so that means communication with our communities. And so with Nancy, you know, like, when we met with her, the vulnerability was being honest with her about things that were like, we didn't quite get this right. We know we didn't, but we're also in process. We're also artists. We're also Chicanos. We're also children of immigrants. We're also trying to do our best to tell stories. So I always like to look at artists as, like, yes, you know, let's take responsibility, but let's also try to be gentle with each other, because it is a process of growth. Like, we're all human. We're all growing constantly. Like, it never ends. So, yeah.
I just want to say, in that meeting, I think, like, because I get super deep, and then Marvin was like, I think I almost cried 10 times in this conversation.
I just want to piggy off back. You can't ask a question like that and then say we have 3 minutes,
Listen,
okay?
America, I'm trying to do the best I can do.
We all have valid points. But what Linda said, I want to piggyback off what Linda's saying about, you know, it's a process. And I think you said it, Justin, you know, the shame of what's happening with our Black and brown communities and our artists is that we come from a place where we've been told this story over and over and over again, that there's not enough room for all of us, that there's only room for one, that if there's one brown story, there can't be the other brown story, that if one person's telling the story of Boyle Heights, someone else doesn't have a story from Boyle Heights. And I think that it's time we let go of that and realize that we all have our own version of the story to tell. And if we start attacking one another because your story doesn't include me telling my story doesn't mean you shouldn't go tell your story. You know, and wanting your story to be told should be part and parcel of respecting and wanting other people's story to be told, whether or not there's room for you in that. And as a Latina, I haven't always found like there's space and room for me inside every Latino story that was told, but that doesn't mean I'm gonna go out and attack and take down stories that don't necessarily represent me. That should inspire me. That should inspire all of us to say, that's just the beginning of our community telling our stories. If there's room for as many white stories as there are on television, there's room for more than one brown story of Boyle Heights. And when we went around with this web series to shop it around, you know, we got like, oh, you know, we hear there's another story about Boyle Heights. It's like, you know, Boyle Heights is a place, not a story, right? Like, oh, they did a movie in New York? Yeah, you can't touch New York again. Like, what does that even mean? But I think it's up to us as artists, as Linda was saying, to be supportive of each other and say, because Latinos are telling their story, that doesn't mean we don't want Black people to tell their story. Because, and by the way, Black people are Latinos and Latinos are Black people and gay people. And so ultimately, you know, it shouldn't be, oh, check the box, the Boyle Heights story got told. It should be, this is just the beginning, and this should inspire every single one of you as producers, writers, creators, as the people who run this festival and decide what gets told and what gets seen, that there's room for more than one of us at the table.
I want to share an example, I'll try to be brief because
momentarily.
I just want to share this example of responsibility as a storyteller. You know, growing up in Boyle Heights, I remember I went to Australia and I told someone I was from East Los Angeles, and the first thing this person said, oh, aren't you afraid you're going to get shot? And I said, no, never. And then when I read Father Greg Boyle's story, he said that there was a screenwriter who had never gone to Boyle Heights, I'm pretty sure, because the information was wrong, and he wrote Colors, okay? And he wrote this movie where the gang members used guns, right? This movie depicted something that was unreal and very irresponsible because as a result of that movie, the gang members said, oh, shoot, we should go get guns. They got guns. A lot of people have died as a result of that movie, okay? That screenwriter, I don't know what he's gonna be in his next life, maybe Mexican, right? But when you write stories that are not authentic, and here's the big thing, right? When you write Latinos as victims, right, you rob them of their dignity. Everybody is doing the best they can with what they have. So when you come from love, you're saying, you know what? Even though it's fucked up, the situation that they're oppressed, they're under-resourced, they have all these obstacles, they still have humor, they still have their dignity intact, right? And that's the way you write any human being, right? So it is important to have responsibility. I'm very lucky that when someone complains about my work, I say, I might teach you screenwriting. You know what? And if people really care about the story, they'll come to my screenwriting class. If not, they'll shut up. And I said, see, it's hard to be a writer. We want to tell every story, but there's 1,000 stories that need to be written. So if you really see a story that's missing, maybe you're supposed to write it, right?
Okay.
Create it, create it.
I've been done got the wrap-up finger, but that was worth it, right? Guys, thank you so much. Really.
And thank you to everyone who came out, right?
Oh my God, thank you guys so much. Thank you, Sundance.
It's a beautiful, beautiful piece of work. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all so much.